Welcome to the All Outdoors Photography Podcast. This podcast is about all things outdoor photography, including landscapes, wildlife, macro, and more. The show features two talented photographers, Henry Doyle and Ryan Taylor, who bring their different experiences in photography to the podcast. The show is released weekly every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, so I hope you sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. In today's episode, Henry and Ryan give an overview about digital photo editing, also known as post-processing, talking about their own personal styles and what they seek out of editing photos, and then they discuss basic adjustments versus deep edits, including global sliders, layers, masks, HDR, and more. As always, we hope you sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. And follow us on Instagram at All Outdoors Photography Podcast.
Welcome back to episode 37 of the All Outdoors Photography Podcast. And today, we're going to talk about the post-production side of photography.
Yep, we're going to be talking about all things photo editing, specifically, I think, digital photo editing, which is what both Henry and I do mainly. So we're just going to be talking about all that and the fun ways you can creatively express yourself through your photographs.
Yeah, there's just so much you can do on your computer. You can just really transform your photo, make slight adjustments, just very versatile.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the digital darkroom, as they say, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. I do want to make one note before we get into the podcast. If the audio doesn't sound as good as normal, we've had a power outage, so we're both recording on our phones, essentially. So the audio might be a little bit off, but hopefully it's not too bad for you guys.
Yep. Show must go on.
Yep.
We get it done.
All right. Yeah, fun fact, I'm actually under a blanket right now. So, yeah.
In case you want to isolate and muffle the sound a little bit. Yeah. There you go.
Yep.
It's one way to do it. So what would you say is your post-processing like workflow and style like? And like what software do you use?
Okay, so I use a combination of Lightroom and Photoshop. So Lightroom is where I catalog everything and do most of my edits, and then I'll take it into Photoshop, especially for landscapes. If I want to do some more cleanup work, remove large portions of the image, or remove a log or remove some trash. I'll also do I don't do brackets, but I'll do focus stacks with Photoshop, but mostly Lightroom. But there's a nice integration between the two, so I use them in tandem fairly frequently.
Okay.
What do you use? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna make a comment. Yeah, I think it's interesting though. You're saying you use kind of more than one software, and I've noticed that with a lot of people's workflows I've talked about with is that they kind of use several different tools, I guess, to achieve their photographic, visions or whatever.
Yeah. The thing I like about Photoshop and Lightroom, though, it really doesn't feel like separate softwares, because you could open in Photoshop directly from Lightroom, and then when you save in Photoshop as well, it goes right back to Lightroom. So it's really nice, really convenient.
Yeah, it's neat it's nice when both you got the same kind of brand software, because they do kind of work together. At least I'd hope they do. So, and Adobe especially would work that way. Yeah. So Photoshop and Lightroom, they play pretty well, I'd say.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you use?
Yeah. So I use mainly Skylum software. So I have Luminar 2018 and 3. The 3 is the newer version of it, which has this full-blown catalog library, digital assets management, which is basically what Lightroom is comparatively. But I use 2018 mainly just because it runs a lot better on my lower spec desktop computer here. I use those mainly. Aurora HDR for bracketed shots, which we'll get into a little bit more later. And then just a variety of other different tools Helicon Focus for focus stacking, Hugin for panorama stitching. And yeah, it's pretty much it. What's that?
Great variety, definitely. You're using the multiple programs.
What I'll say is I use the Luminar program the most, just because most images serve that basic. I use that to treat my basic adjustments, and the Aurora software I use mainly obviously for brackets mainly. It's pretty much all it's really good for specifically, but it does that really well, I will say. And like the other tools I use very seldomly, just because I don't take those kind of shots a lot. But they're just like specialized, I guess, software tools they use. But yeah, I mean, I use those mainly. And my workflow kind of just goes with that, where it's like I'll just choose whatever software I need to make the shot work, I guess, overall. My style's pretty bare bones, honestly. Like I just keep it to lots of basic adjustments. I really don't like to go overboard with most shots. I just feel like most of them don't call for it. And yeah, I mean, it's just keeping it real nice and simple. I'm not afraid to like make it overpower that saturation or something if I need to, but I usually like to keep things real nice and simple.
Hey, yeah, I think
wait,
for nature photography, it's kind of
Henry.
Definitely. Hello?
Okay.
Can you hear me?
I know you're making like a lot of shuffling sound, I think.
I am?
Yeah. I was hearing a lot of sounds when I was talking.
Oh, here, let me move to a different seat, maybe. I don't know.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
It's fine.
Yeah. Let's see.
Like, yeah, go ahead and talk when you're ready. I don't know. I was just hearing like a lot of sound.
Okay.
All right. Go ahead.
Yeah. 1 second. You can still hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was hearing everything.
Okay. All right. This should work. Okay. So yeah, I like how you use the combination, and you mentioned you don't go overboard on the editing. Like it doesn't seem like you use all of those programs every time. That's a good thing. Not to like overuse things for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to be consistent, I guess, like using the same tools, maybe like ones that you're familiar with. But yeah, I'd agree where it's like, it's nice to have some variety, but just use what you know best, I think is the name of the game here.
Yeah, for sure. Like, that repetition of editing will really allow for an efficient workflow. It's really just essential. You don't want to have to learn something new every time you want to edit a photo. Like, even if your editing software isn't perfect, like you need to find a way around it. Like we don't have the luxury of switching every time we need a different look or something. So
right. Yeah, I mean, everyone learns it differently too. I think like I really have not used Lightroom all that much, which I know it sounds like heresy because it's like a photographer's dream software, I guess. Because like I think most people use it honestly, and same with Photoshop, of course, but. Yeah, it's just all about finding what works for you and like what you like to use and gravitate towards. Like, I just found like the tools on this, the software I use is like, it works for me. I know how to use it pretty well, I think now. And to change up and switch up things might be nice, but like, I feel like it's just kind of going to like alienate you almost too in your editing process.
Yeah. I will say this might be kind of controversial, but Lightroom isn't, it's not like some magical software. It's slow. So the majority of photographers, there's a more modern Lightroom called Lightroom Creative Cloud.
Mm-hmm.
But the majority of photographers will use Lightroom Classic, including me. And it's really old. Like it's an old software. It's very slow. It's not well optimized. Takes a while to use. So it's not the greatest thing in the world. Like, I think a lot of photographers are afraid to switch to like Luminar, like you used, but it's definitely not like the holy grail that everyone makes it seem like. It's just a tool ultimately.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's like in like what you use shouldn't really matter that much, but I know for the sake of this episode, it does. I mean, because we're talking about it a little more in depth than we normally would. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, especially with Luminar and the versus Lightroom, is they get compared a lot, sometimes unfavorably. But they're pretty different softwares, I'd say. They just happen to have the same kind of set of tools, and then some, of course.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it just depends, though. But,
so yeah, let's kind of get into some of the post processing like techniques, but I want to start with, I know we mentioned workflow, but I want to kind of dive in a little bit more. So when you kind of first go on the computer after a shoot or whenever you edit your images, what is the first thing you do to prepare?
For like editing the photo itself?
Yeah, like how do you import or like do you
Well, I know we did an episode about workflow, but I'll just like touch upon it briefly.
Yeah, I was just thinking we could briefly just say, like, do you edit right away, or do you save it to a folder? Just briefly,
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I sort and categorize and organize everything by like location, month, year. I kind of break it down all these different things. And then obviously like the raw files themselves are time stamped. They have like my business name on there, like embedded into the raw file. And then it has the day of the date, the time. I don't geotag my stuff. That's just personal preference for my own reasons, just to keep things, separate, I guess. But I know where the locations are, and I keep them in folders that are named for those locations or whatnot. But yeah, that's what I first do is upon image import, I just throw everything onto the respective folders. And then from there, I get out usually a pad of paper because I'm old fashioned and a pen, and I start writing down the raw file names, the file names. So like if I'm at the raw or 0011.cr2 is my Canon raw file extension. And I'll just write down like just the numbers, so to speak, and I'll like separate them by commas. So like I'll just make out a list basically of all the different like raw files I'd edit for like this session or whatever, however many images I'm looking at. Yeah, and then yeah, this is what I do. So I get this big long list, and then I'll just sit down, put on like a podcast like this or some music or something, and just kind of churn through them. Not too fast, I'll say, but like I'll just go through them in a session or an evening or something if I have time, and just churn out the edits. But like I said, I keep everything pretty easy. Nothing. I don't. I honestly I go pretty fast through the edits. And it's kind of like a guilty thing, but I know a lot of people will spend like hours on slaving away on this one image, and I'm very kind of quick. Like I'm just quick to capture the feeling and the essence of the image, and so I usually take about probably like 5-10 minutes, maybe most, on each image, unless it just requires a lot of extra cloning or dodging and burning, maybe. But yeah, I just import, categorize, separate, and then I just start loading them up one by one. I junk the files that are clearly out of focus or overexposed or underexposed. Any of that stuff that's like very obvious upon you first opening the image file on like the photo viewer app or software. And then I just write down like the ones I want to edit. I'm not going to edit all the ones that I keep, of course, but like I'll keep more than I need to. I think I should keep. So basically junk the really bad ones, I guess. Keep everything that's okay to great and excellent, and then only edit the great to excellent stuff, if that makes sense. But yeah. So basically it's like a calling process of multi-step like process for me. And I'm pretty choosy. I'll edit more than I think I like really, really like, but not everything's going to get uploaded to like social media or my website, of course. And yeah, I just edit the select few images I do, and then export and downsize the JPEG files, and that's pretty much it. So at least on that front.
So you downsize the JPEGs, you said?
Yeah, I use a software. I'm not affiliated, but I guess I can plug it. It's called Jpeg Mini Pro. It is paid software. I honestly don't remember how much I paid for it, but it's a one-time license for one use on like one computer, so to speak. And it's really affordable, and honestly, it makes a big difference because it doesn't downsize your JPEGs. And I've done like a good test of like side by side, and I'm like, I don't see a difference, but it does have usually about half the file size, and so I export about 80% quality, which you can do 80. 80 is like a good sweet spot because anything above that JPEG quality, at least for that file type specifically, is going to be about the same. But basically, what I'm saying is when I end up with like an exported file that's like 15 megabytes, that's going to add up over time. I mean, memory's cheap nowadays, but I still want to save as much space, I guess, in hard drive storage as much as I can. And so over these past couple of years of all these images I'm editing and everything, and all these raw files, it adds up pretty quick, I think. And then not including, of course, the video and stuff I do too, which adds up a lot more quickly, of course.
Oh my God. Yeah. The video is just insane.
Yeah. Don't get me started on that, but I'm at the gills with that stuff in terms of storage space. But that software is really nice because it does like cut your file size pretty much in half, and for each file, I mean. And I'll just anytime I'm done exporting a series of images, new stuff or old whatever, I'll throw them on that software, and it's pretty quick software. Like it just churns them right through, and you can have them save it to overwrite the file, which I do now because I'm comfortable with using it. I'm not afraid it's going to, lessen the quality, and it still looks great. So it's pretty nice.
Yeah, I mean, you're being very efficient, which is cool. Like you find this the point where you don't lose like quality or clarity. I mean, of course, you're losing quality, but like not perceptible quality. So.
Yeah, I don't know the actual like science, I guess, of like the pixels per inch or the density. I don't know like what to call it, but like all I know is I'm looking at the numbers on the files, and I'm like, that's reducing the file size, but it's not reducing the quality. You know what I mean? Which is like obviously like an ideal like scenario, because obviously you don't want normally you don't want to reduce quality.
I mean, you're a big like you do a lot of social media stuff, so you also do prints and stuff, but like you're kind of resizing your images for the medium, I guess.
Yeah, and that's just like the finished JPEG. So I mean, like I said, or like what you mentioned, I can print those out, and they look pretty good. If I enlarge them, it might look a little wonky at times. Depending on the papers and the size, of course, and if I crop them at all, crop them for print specifically. But yeah, I mean, like just throwing them on social media or on my website, it looks perfect if you ask me. You couldn't ask for more. And I don't even have like a really high end like megapixel count DSLR either. But it looks great, and it works for my needs.
Yeah, cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how about you?
Yeah, so I when I come back from the field, I import the raw files to 2 drives, just the exact same, so like just a duplicate basically. One of those drives, which is the SSD, I'll edit off of that because it's faster. And then I will import it into Lightroom. It's pretty simple. That'll build a one-to-one preview, so I can like see the full resolution file. It doesn't take up any extra storage, but it like basically loads the file from the folder, so you can see the full thing. And that's I find that critical, so I can like check focus and stuff to make sure it's actually in focus and loading the full thing. And then I'll get into my editing specifics later. But after I throw an edit on that, I will export. I'm kind of different than you. I'm kind of a sharpness snob, kind of like that's. If there's one thing about photography I could obsess over, it's sharpness, really. So I will export full res, 26 megapixels, whatever that is. I don't know the dimensions of that. But I find like I've tried resizing for social media, but I find that I just don't like the results how Instagram deals with it. Like I like how Instagram handles my full res JPEGs. I like how my print website handles that as well. So I'll just do that. Full res works for me. I don't find that the storage is horrible. The place where storage really sucks is the raw files, but there's nothing you can do about that. You will want to resize your raw files, of course. But yeah, also for printing, if I ever print, I'll do like a separate export. I have a different folder for that. So I'll add some exposure because if you know when you print, it can sometimes come out a bit dark. I'll change the contrast a bit depending on where I'm printing it. And yeah, that's what I do for export and import. So it works pretty well.
I do like sharpness though. Don't get me wrong.
But yeah.
I was like, did I mention I don't like sharpness? No, I would recommend. It's all good. Yeah, I mean, I recommend. I guess a little pointer here is to always like if you do want to sharpen your photo, of course, always wait till like that's the very last thing before export, because it's like if you're messing around with like other, I don't know, sliders or anything that just tweaks the image at all, and then you sharpen like let's say you denoise the shot, or even if you raise it,
definitely.
Yeah, if you raise the noise especially, or like you just keep it where it's at, and like let's say you shot the image at a high ISO because it was a dark woodland, or there's a bird that's just in the shadow or whatever, and then you sharpen that image, it's going to sharpen the noise because that's what's present in the image, of course, like embedded into that image file. And you may not like that, or you may not want it at all. So, I mean, it's important to think I feel like it's important to really get a workflow that both makes sense and works for you, like I keep saying. And so that's just like one little step I'd recommend is that, sharpen the very last step should really be that if you so choose.
I used to make that mistake you mentioned where I sharpened first and then I did noise reduction. I don't know why I thought that would work. Like, it's just not. You got to do it completely opposite. But,
Yeah, in that instance, yeah, completely opposite. Or at least reverse those two steps. That's one instance. But Skyline Lunar is interesting because it has. I actually don't use like the proper. It's called sharpening, of course. Like I don't use the sharpening slider, but I use a different. It's like kind of like a proprietary, like their own name for it. But it's called Details Enhancer, and that effectively is the same as sharpening, at least in my experience. But it kind of, I don't know how to describe it. It like sharpens, but it like kind of adds like a slight contrast to everything. So it's like it has like a nice look to it that I really like. So I actually use
clarity. Maybe something like that.
Well, that's also on there, but no, it's just called Details Enhancer, which is the weird thing.
Huh.
But yeah, there is a clarity slider that I use. I use that pretty much. I use it on most images, just a little bit. But no, it's just called Details Enhancer. I don't know, but it's basically like a sharpener and then some, I guess, which is neat.
Yeah, I know. Probably the Adobe equivalent of that is Smart Sharpen in Photoshop. It's kind of like a automatic thing. It's enhances the details.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also have a clarity slider, but I personally despise the Lightroom clarity slider because it adds a blue cast to your photo. I don't know why, but it does. I don't know how what a blue cast has to do with clarity, but there's always a heavy blue that goes over your image.
I think I've noticed that too. Actually, yeah, it depends on the color, like the tones of the image itself. But yeah, I noticed it kind of does cool things down a little bit, so to speak. Yeah, that's interesting though.
I don't know. It's odd.
But I mean, yeah, sharpening is a pretty obvious tool. Like I'm pretty sure that's probably for you too. It's like one of the first ones you really get the grasp, I guess, when it comes to software. Because it's just obvious what its role is pretty one dimensional, so to speak, where it's just sharpen the image or de-sharpen it, soften it.
I think there is a little bit of nuance though. Like, especially for wildlife photography, I will not sharpen the overall image at all. So I'll put it down to 0. And then I'll get a brush in Lightroom and I'll paint the sharpening on the bird or on the animal. So I can choose what areas of the image to sharpen, so I don't get extra artifacts of sharpening in places in the image that I don't care about sharpening. Does that make sense?
Right. And that's actually the really smart way because which maybe we'll touch upon here in a moment, but global sliders affect the entire image, and they don't really. Like if you're using a layer or mask, or if you're just selectively touching up, I guess, like a photo, like you're saying, like maybe you just want to sharpen up the eye or the face of a mammal or something. But if you sharpen that whole image, it's going to, sharpen the whole image, of course, the entire frame, the image file. But yeah, I mean, you're going about it, and like, I guess the right way would be the way to put it is that you want to sharpen just a specific part like of the image that you want everyone to like view the eye to, I guess.
Yeah, because I feel like the problem sometimes people will do sharpening and then, maybe it looks great on their animal, but then you look up at the sky and there's like these chunks because of the sharpening. So sharpen those details in the sky, which is really undesirable. So I think that is definitely the way to go, doing the mask and whatnot.
Yeah, and like fine tuning, like selective sharpening, it may kind of, I don't want to say slow you down. It might add a little bit more time to like the editing process, but it's not going to be much. But like I feel like the image overall is going to look a lot better as a result too.
Oh yeah, for sure, and it's definitely kind of a professional way to do it, I think.
Yeah, definitely. It's like a step above, I'd say, just like affecting the whole image and just working in a singular layer for the image file.
It might be intimidating too for a lot of beginner photographers, but I don't think it's really like it's hard to mess up. Like I know, like for example, if you're dodging and burning in an editing software, if you go over the place you're trying to dodge, it could create a halo. You know what I'm talking about? Like you can see where the eye is light.
It's kind of like halo banding, yeah.
Yeah, but See, the sharpening is if you go a little bit over, it's fine. Like it's not a big deal. So you don't have to be too worried about ruining your image. Like if you go a little bit over your subject, it's not that many days. So
Right.
definitely experiment with it, and you can get some great results.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah, it just depends on, I guess, the effect in the final outcome you want, of course, because you can just affect that whole frame or whatever. But yeah, it's gonna affect every part of the image, which you may not want either. So it depends if you want, like, I guess, like a realistic look of the image. Like if you do want like a realistic bird shot or something, then go for that, of course. But maybe you want something that's more like abstract or artistic, then maybe you do want it to be like a certain other way. So it depends on how you want to approach it.
Yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
So I was thinking maybe we could just kind of go through some of the major slides, just kind of talk about our thoughts here. So we already kind of covered sharpness. So let's talk about exposure a bit. So just the general exposure slider. So what are your thoughts on that? How do you use that?
Um, use it very conservatively, I will say. I try not to use it too much, simply because it's a very powerful tool. I think it's one of the most powerful sliders there is, because like if you like, most raw files, of course, start at 0, but if you go all the way up to 10, that's a pretty big jump. And if you're checking your histogram like you should when you edit like a raw file, it's a pretty big jump on there too. So it's a tool that I use sometimes. I'm not going to say every image deserves like to use it, because I feel like I do know metering fairly well, and I'm just going to work at the image in the field rather than on the computer with exposure. But I mean, like, I'm not afraid to, like, if it was a dark evening and like I got a good looking and focused shot, but like it's too underexposed, I'm not afraid to like bump up that exposure or vice versa.
Yeah, I totally get that. You definitely have to be careful. It's very like even the slightest like movement is like a crazy brightness jump.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I find on the exposure slider, at least, I never go past like a stop on the exposure.
Right.
I don't really like how it turns out because, like we were talking about earlier, it's a global slider, so it kind of affects the entire image.
Right. Yeah. And I feel like early on, especially, it's like, I know my experience. If I got like a really, really underexposed image, like it's just a very, like, almost completely black frame, but I tried to use that exposure slider to slide it all the way up to save it, but you just can't do that, or vice versa.
Yeah,
It's impossible.
In the beginning, I think you're so excited by the raw file format, you think it's just this invincible file, but it's not. You have to get your exposure right in camera, or at least close to right.
Yeah, at least close to like the vision you had, like, or like nowadays, obviously, I'd shoot, like, if I'm shooting let's say a waterfall or even a landscape in general, and like it's a kind of like high contrast scene, I guess. Bright sky, and then like the mid and foreground's kind of more flatter, I guess, diffused in color. I don't know, I'm just making up things. But it's basically, if I'm trying to bracket the scene, or if I need to bracket the scene, I'm saying, then I would do that. And I know that ahead of time, like, I'm going to have to compile these images on the computer. But yeah, I mean, early on, I just kind of willy nilly just shot stuff in full automatic, especially, just hope for the best. But then I get back on the computer and I'm like, why are these all like just completely black squares or white squares?
Yeah.
I think we've all been there at least once or many times. I don't know.
Oh yeah,
It's pretty terrible.
I've been there. Yeah,
yeah. You have to learn a lesson.
it's one of the worst feelings ever, for sure, in photography.
I know.
And yeah, that exposure slider will help you there, really.
Mhm.
So kind of the next one, this is similar to exposure, but it's like the highlight panel. What do you think about that? Like the highlight slider?
No, that's actually, I'm glad you brought that one up next, because I feel like that goes hand in hand with exposure, the exposure slider, namely. So I use the highlight shadow more often than not, than compared to, at least, with the exposure, especially in regards to like a global slider like we were talking about, because it's a global slider where it affects the whole frame, of course, but it's very specific to it. So what I'm saying is, like, maybe you have a very high contrast, like a high noon kind of image, I guess, in the woods, and there's some really just deep dark shadows on one side of the photograph, and then a bright sunspot on the other side. And I don't know, let's just say you want to keep everything well exposed, histograms all over the place, just lots of clipping and everything going on. So I'll use the highlights and shadows to bring everything kind of to a more equal, I guess, grounds, so to speak, with the histogram and everything. And so everything's well exposed. So like it kind of gets obvious, I think, but I'll just say it's like the shadows that bumps up or down the exposure for the shadows only in the image. And the software should be intelligent enough to read that already. And then obviously the inverse is that the highlights adjust the highlights only in the image. So it's kind of like an exposure slider and then some, but it's a little more intelligent, I think, and it's not quite as overbearing and powerful, let's say, as the exposure slider is.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I will say you can still definitely take it too far on the sliders. Like,
oh, definitely.
I know one example is woodland scenes with the highlight slider. If you take those highlights down too far, like trees look so weird because like the relationship of the side light of the trees is like it looks so odd. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but like
I think so. Yeah, I've probably done it before, no doubt.
Yeah, I haven't seen any images like that, but like
I'm talking like early days, like editing stuff. It's stuff you'll never see, and I don't want to see again.
And then, but yeah, highlight tool is great. I will say adjust your overall exposure first, and then turn down the highlights, because that way you're getting that data down instead of increasing the exposure after you adjust the highlights. So
right.
You definitely want to do that afterwards. And then kind of leading on from that, with the shadows, that is definitely different, I would say. Mm-hmm. At least on my camera, I don't know how good the dynamic range is on yours, but I have to be careful with the shadows.
Since I'm on a crop sensor, obviously my dynamic range is a little more diminished than like a full frame, of course, for example. But I have to be very careful and mindful of that when in the field, of course, taking the shots, because if it's too dark, like sometimes I just can't recover that. Or obviously the same for the highlights too.
Or even if you can recover it, sometimes you'll get that digital noise, like that'll show up with the shadows. Like even if you take your shot at ISO 100, you can still get noise in the shadows when you bring it up, because basically, kind of getting technical here, when you bring up the shadows, you're bringing up the ISO in post in that section of the image, so you still get the equivalent noise value. That was very technical, but that's what's happening. So you will get noise.
That's like the closest thing you get to simulating ISO, like when it comes to post-production. So I definitely agree there. I will mention that, like, and this goes for all the sliders, but adjusting them to 100%, either back or forth, doesn't matter. I don't want to say don't do it. Like, honestly, what I would say is, especially if you're new to post-production on digital, like computer and photography, is to just like try messing around with the sliders. Just have fun with it, just try and like back and forth, drag them back and forth and see what happens. But I know for like the highlights and shadows is that, everything can kind of look flat if you get everything like, how do I say it? Like very brightly highlighted, exposed, and there's no depth to it. You need shadow and light for the reason of photography speaking. You need those for depth. And if you don't have any shadow or, highlight at all, it doesn't matter each one or both even, is that, it makes a really kind of dull looking photograph overall.
Oh yeah. Like just contrast and just very undesirable for sure.
Yeah. So you need that contrast, which that'd be a good segue to the next one.
Yeah.
So contrast. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I'll take it away. Contrast. I'd say that's probably next to exposure, like the most common, and sharpening, like the most common one that beginners, novices probably start with, because it's just fun to like mess around with and see what happens. But it kind of goes with the previous ones you mentioned. So, do you use contrast a lot?
This is kind of crazy, but I don't. I do not like the contrast slider. So instead of doing contrast, I will do a whites and blacks adjustment. So usually that just needs turning the blacks down, and that gives the level of contrast I want. Personally, I find that contrast kind of affects my exposure. So by turning down the blacks panel instead, I can keep my same exposure, but just change the level of contrast.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So I just rarely touch the contrast slider. I really just don't the overly contrasty images. That's just not my style. Like I have contrast in all my images, but like it's still fairly neutral, I guess.
Yeah, you're only adjusting it like number 0.4 or like -4. Like you're doing very micro adjustments, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And I feel like you and me are kind of in the same boat there, but just editing overall is that we're very meticulous, I guess, like very micro adjustments. It's small little parts are moving. We're not doing some big like 100% contrast. I mean, I've done that plenty in the early days, of course, but nowadays I'm the same way as you, where I just like, well, actually, I do use contrast. I will say it's not like I just mentioned; it's very small little adjustments, but I find, especially if I want to like just up the shadow and light interplay with the image. Not all of them, of course, but if I want to just up it a little bit, I will bring it up to like 5, maybe up to 10 if I'm just feeling quite adventurous with the shot or the edit in particular. But I mean, I guess that's the nice part about digital photography is that you can edit it, so to speak, like indefinite amount of times. And so like you can churn out different edits. You'd be like, this is my high contrast edit. This is one where I flatten everything down a little bit more and compare the two and see what you think you like best.
Yeah, you can even make like a digital copy so you're not affecting the overall image. You just do multiple of the same.
Yeah, because raw files are non-destructive, so that really helps too. Because JPEGs or even I think TIFF files lossless. Do you know? I don't use TIFF.
No, they're destructive. So if you make that, it's baked in.
They're like a step above JPEG, I think, like in terms of file size and depth to it.
Yeah, so they retain some shadow and highlight, color detail, but not nearly as much as RAW. That's why I don't use Photoshop as much as some other photographers do. That's why I use it last usually if I do end up using an image because it is destructive. So you can't go back and edit quite as much on the image.
Right. Yeah, I mean, like I said, early on I use that contrast a lot, and I probably max it out honestly, but I use it like.
Oh my! Wow.
Well, I mean, just for fun, like because I'm just having fun with it, of course. But nowadays I want something that's a little more. I want stuff that's colorful and saturated, but like not overbearingly like fake looking most of the time. So yeah, I use it very sparingly, but not every image I think deserves like even touching that contrast. Honestly, I probably bump it down more than I use it like on a positive higher contrast.
I feel like as you start to become a better photographer, you really get a sense for contrast. Like it comes naturally to me now. Like I just kind of know how much contrast I want. Like I just kind of feel it out.
I think it's interesting to go with all these like tools and editing like sliders and pieces is that you can, for the most part, you can simulate a lot of them in the field. Like if you just focus well enough, you don't really need a sharpening tool. Like, and if you have a nice dynamic range of like a scene or a camera that you're using, you don't really need the contrast so much.
Yeah, I mean, especially going out on a good lighting day. Like there you go. You don't need contrast slider. You might need contrast, but you don't need to make a major exposure adjustment. Or you just pick the day based on what image you want.
Right. Yeah. So it kind of goes with all these really is that, it just depends on what you're going for. And I find it's the best. Like post-production is only as good as the image you're editing to, especially. Like if your image sucks, it's not going to be saved when editing the image on a computer. It might make it better and you might save it, but it's still not going to be a good image or what could be a great one if it didn't start that way too.
Yeah. So let's see. What else? Saturation. So there's a lot there. So what do you think about the global saturation slider?
Yeah, I mean, once again, kind of like just like we mentioned with both sharpening and contrast. I use it a little bit, but I like to make things a little bit more colorful than they turn out. because especially if you're shooting in RAW, which I'd recommend, of course, for pretty much anyone with a DSLR, that RAW file is not going to retain. It's going to retain all the memory of it, but it's like it only like retains it in like a temporary state, so to speak, like embedded into the image file. And so you got to bring out all that color and stuff back. So what you may find is, and this might be kind of like shocking to someone that's never seen like a raw file, like, blown up on the computer, is that it's going to look very, very dull. Like you got this beautiful sunset landscape at the prairie or meadow, and you go back to your computer, you're all excited. It's going to be some warm, orange glow color of that golden hour. And then you get back on the computer and it's like a dull, like brown, like it just looks like a very, it's like a very muted like color palette, and you're like, what is this? This is not how I remember it, and I know I didn't capture it to look like this bad. But you got to imagine it's like the image is there. You just have to bring it back. So you almost have to remember how it looks if you want it to be realistic. And yeah. So what I'm getting at is that like for saturation, I like to make it how I felt in that moment, but also how it like actually looked. So if there's some like nice fall foliage, I'm going to bring back a lot more color and probably a little bit extra just to give it that nice pop of color and, later on post. But it just depends on what I'm going for with the image. Once again, I'm not afraid to desaturate things or even slide it all the way to black and white, which we can probably talk about next if you want. But
yeah, I mean, all the data is there in the raw file. That's the beauty of raw. So all your color information is there. So, like you said, you really need to remember what's there and bring it out of the editing room.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Do you use saturation a lot?
So I don't use the global slider very often. Maybe just a small adjustment, but I'll go to the HSL panel. It may be something else on Luminar and other software. But pretty much all the major ones have the same thing. So that allows me to adjust individual colors. So I find that, especially in like a woodland scene, if you turn up the orange too much, the tree branches will start to look unnatural.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll just turn up the greens or turn up the yellows or just whatever the scene looks like. Also for waterfalls. So sometimes you're like, if you have a white flowing waterfall, sometimes your camera will capture it as blue. That has something to do with like the white balance and also just kind of the way it perceives water. And I don't really like the blue look to waterfalls, so I will sometimes desaturate the blues or not add in blue. So I like using the individual colors.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the waterfall example. Is that I'm kind of the same way almost, where I don't like it to look too blue. Actually, I like it to look like more like a pure white, but without being overexposed, of course. But it just depends, though. Some of them actually look pretty, I'd say, like pleasing overall if they're blue.
Oh yeah, it's definitely a case by case basis for sure.
Definitely, yeah. But I mean, I feel like most of my editing is really like global sliders, but like I just minor adjust them. I don't do anything crazy, but I'm not afraid that like what you do is fine tune like the sharpening for a specific part of the layer or whatever I'm using.
Yeah, I think it's global sliders aren't bad. Like people get scared off by them. Like you definitely use them effectively. It's just all about using them in moderation, really.
Yeah, definitely. Especially like I feel like the older or the more invested, I guess, in photography you get, you almost forget about the global sliders because everyone gets like so wrapped up in the technical of like layers and masking. And I'm like, for a quick edit, it's those tools are pretty powerful and they still work pretty well to make things look nice or nicer.
Yeah, especially like exposure wise for the global slider. I'm not like I rarely like raising the shadows. I'll definitely turn down the highlights, but exposure wise, I'm just pretty much using the global exposure. So,
do you ever do like black and white a lot, like high contrast black and white or anything?
So, I have actually not done a single black and white in over a year. I completely quit black and white. It was just a decision I made. I really love color, and I just stopped doing it. I don't know. It's been a shift for me, but I haven't missed it. What about you?
I find that it depends on the subject, but like a waterfall, I almost always or I mean, any image that has a good deep contrast, like highlights, shadows, are all just like there's a lot of depth to the scene. And like this could be a landscape midday, or it could be a waterfall that just has a lot of dynamic range and kind of bursts of color in there. I will like since I'm already opened up with that color image, which is usually what I edit first, and for that reason is the color one. I'm already in the image like file and stuff, so I just quickly throw on the desaturate and just see how it looks. And that's just like an afterthought most of the time. It's not like I go into there saying like this image is destined to be black and white, but more often than not, I find there's really surprising results with the black and white versions too. So they're pretty cool in their own. And I don't always I don't always export those, but I do like to edit those real quick and just see how they'll look and how they stack up to, versus the color ones.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a great way to do it. I think I could never be one of those people that does all black and white, but maybe I'll introduce some back into my workflow.
Or maybe try out the way I do it. Yeah, if like since you're already in there with the color, like export that and then just flip on the black and white stuff and mess with the contrast and see what happens.
Have you ever tried changing the color temperature on black and white? It's really cool what happens.
Yeah. I messed around a little bit with it. But I feel like I'm like more adventurous with any kind of sliders and editing when it's black and white. Like when it's color, I feel like it's too easy to fall prey to like upping the saturation too much. But like when it's black and white, I'm not afraid to like bump up the contrast pretty high and just mess around with that. Like I feel like that's more like a playful, like I don't know how to describe it, like mood for the image, I guess. If that makes sense.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like you can make more changes to black and white images and still kind of have a consistent portfolio, I think.
Right. Yeah. I'm not afraid as much to like make everything look more over the top, like a vignette. Like I usually prefer a very subtle vignette on like very, very subtle on most images I take or edit. But black and white, like I'm not afraid to make that like less than half and darken it so it's like pretty noticeable on the image. Like I'm not afraid to do that when it's black and white. So
yeah, I'm gonna be honest, I forgot about vignettes. It must be like 7 or 8 months since I've used a vignette.
Really?
I should though. I just kind of forgot about it.
I feel like when they're some people really and like once again it's a creative choice, so I respect it, but like a lot of certain people I've noticed, they consistently like every image has a very big harsh vignette on it. And I'm not gonna say it's wrong, but it just depends on the stylistic choice, of course. But like I'm much more of a subtle, like barely tell it's there kind of vignette, and it's usually a dark circle. I very rarely use white ones, unless if maybe I'm going for like a high key approach or something.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty effective in drawing the eye into the image. Mm-hmm. I think there's like been studies and stuff that kind of talk about that. So
I feel like
it definitely works.
Yeah, it depends on the application of it too. Like maybe you're spotlighting, metering and spotlighting a like flower in a dark shaded woodland, and there's a little bit of foliage surrounding it, but it's pretty dark surrounding it, like a black, almost like a natural vignette, which those are cool by the way. But maybe you want to add an extra like circle of it and post a vignette, and that could be a good application where I would max it out almost to 100% if I wanted to. But yeah. More often than not, like you said, it's about finding something that the eye and the viewer can really gravitate towards it. And especially if it's like something like a subject in the center of the scene, you're definitely going to want to put like a slight vignette, I think, to just draw in that eye further and remove the distractions on the side there, of course.
Yeah, totally. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm trying to think. The crop tool, we did talk about that. I know both you and I, we do a lot of different formats. Like we're not always the same frame. So what's kind of your methodology on that?
Well, of course, it depends on the subject. I find like maybe it's because I've just been using Instagram too much, but like I've really grown to like the square, like the one-to-one crop a lot. And I mainly use that on like certain maybe bird portraits or definitely flowers. If I do a top-down flower shot, I find those are nice when they're like in a square format, just because it's very like frame filling and it removes like unnecessary vertical or horizontal negative space, of course. But more often than not, I just kind of stick to like a typical, like a 4x5 vertical or a 16:9 horizontal. My preference though,
I love 16:9. Those are great.
Yeah, or 16:10 even. If you just want a little bit of like a wider and less skinny format. But I find like horizontal, I'm pretty much same at. Like I just kind of keep it the normal resolution that I shoot the image in, which usually is like a 16:9 or so. But specifically for verticals, I usually crop them down slightly to like a 4x5, 5x7, and that's honestly it's something that I kind of been doing recently, I guess. But like I just find that the verticals look too skinny. I don't know how to say it. They're more slender, but like if you crop it down just a little bit, which I usually have enough. If I frame up the subject, whatever it may be, well enough, I should have enough space to crop it down in post if I so choose, of course.
Do you like intentionally frame it nowadays to crop for verticals? Because that's what I have to do now. So don't like the skinny look.
Yeah, that's what I do. I basically I crop things, or excuse me, I compose things in the field in camera, based on how I kind of want to edit and post. And I do that with some intentionality. And yeah, I do a lot of things with composing in camera just so I can lessen the editing time too, of course. But sometimes you just can't avoid certain things too.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty much the same as you. I will say, I'm not trying to correct you or anything, but 16:9 is actually not the native camera aspect ratio. So
really?
3:2 is kind of the rectangle you'll get on your camera. And then 16:9 is a little bit thinner. So it's almost like a panorama format. Not quite.
Right. Like a widescreen.
So I really like 16:9. I've just started using it recently. Especially for like a woodland scene where you got that annoying white sky. A 16:9 can kind of cut that out, but still leave a wide range of details. So right. I really like that. And then for a lot of bird shots for wildlife, I like leaving it in the 3:2 native camera aspect ratio. Because I find that suits a lot of subjects. I'll do occasionally a 1:1 for that. And then for landscapes, I'm really all over the place. I do the 4:5 thing for verticals a lot. I also like 4:3. Have you ever tried that? It's pretty cool.
Yeah, actually, I do that a lot for horizontal. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not too skinny. It's also not too wide. It's kind of in between.
Right.
Instagram hates 4:3 for some reason.
Doesn't play well.
Yeah, I don't know why. But 8:10 is also good. This is my greatest dislikes of Canon. They don't let you shoot 4:5 or 8:10 in camera. I don't know why.
That's true.
It's very annoying. Yeah.
I don't know. We'll have to write a letter and ask them. Yeah, that's a weird choice, especially for such a big name like manufacturer such as that too. It's so strange.
Yeah, the 1:1's cool as well. I love them all, really. Like I'm not afraid to experiment with crops.
There's actually like panoramic photographers, like they shoot on panorama cameras and like that's all they do. Or like, I don't know, macro I guess is a certain type of crop in a sense, but I find it's great to like just be open and experiment to whatever the image you think deserves it should be. Because not every image I take deserves to be a 1:1 square crop, of course. And it would look terrible. It'd be okay. It'd be like consistent from a portfolio standpoint, but I don't feel like it'd be right creatively to just do like the same thing, of course, too.
Yeah, like I feel like you could get 1:1. Just there's some scenes that just are not built for 1:1. Like it's just
it's not the way nature is intended. Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of wildlife. Sometimes a 1:1 can just look bad for an animal. It just doesn't do it justice. I think sometimes. In the landscape as well, really. Like even if you get everything in the landscape in the 1:1, it's still not the same as like a sweeping 3:2.
Definitely. Yeah. like I said, it just depends on what you're going for. And I feel like it's important to have some forethought and like in the field, know what you want to do with the image if you are so cropping it or any other editing tools, really. Just know what you want to do with the end result, like before you actually take the shot.
Yeah. Don't be one of those people that just
I hope that worked
waves their
out.
camera around, it gets frames, and hope they can put it together in post. Shoot when you're in the field and with the intention of having the easiest edit and know your vision for the photograph.
You almost shouldn't have to edit it,
Yeah, I mean, honestly, my best images are the ones that I edit the least. I mean,
oh yeah. You can work so hard at something and still be like only subpar for maybe like your standards or something.
Yeah, if you have to do a lot of dodging and burning or exposure adjustment, it's not going to look as good.
Yeah.
So get it right in camera.
I feel like you probably agree with me, I think, in this instance, but like it's so easy to point out like an overprocessed photo. Like it just looks so obvious.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like I said, it's not, once again, creativity, sure, but like maybe you're not trying to go for that look. But then it's like at the same time, man, it sticks out so easily. Like, man, they like over sharpened, over vignetted it. They use a really harsh vignette on it. I don't know. You can tell they put 100%
texture slider.
Yeah, posterized clarity. There's just there's so many tools, and
it's hard, really, when you're going from your computer to your phone. And there's this it's different on your phone, different on your computer. Like when you're a beginner photographer, it's quite the challenge, really.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, don't even get me started about that. Is trying to make everything look consistent from like a viewing experience.
Yeah.
Like I hate it when it's I don't know, someone like, let's say I post an image on Instagram and then like someone's seeing, I don't know, maybe they're showing it to me on their phone or their computer, and I'm like, why does it look so cool? Like not in like a cool, but like color. I mean, and I'm like, oh, that's not how I edited it. It's like it's terrible. Or any scenario like that. It's just like it does not look the same. Or you print it and it's like just not adding up to how you hoped.
Oh yeah, like I got a family member a print of this Vista in Michigan. I printed it out, and on my computer there was plenty of detail in the water, plenty of detail in the sky, plenty of detail in like the hill. And when I printed it, there was no detail in the sky or hill.
Oh no,
like, it was horrible. I was so disappointed too because it was a big print.
Ugh.
But you got to get a good print shop and adjust for the printing exposure as well.
Yeah, I'd say get a good print lab and make sure you like can trust them to handle if they do handle the raw file to make it like look good or to your specifications, of course. Because I would hate that I've had that happen where it's like on my computer I'm like, this looks good. There's some detail in the shadow, but like it's still pretty dark. Then you print it out and it's like a big black blob like on the corner of one photo. That's like the worst thing ever. And I'm like, but yeah, it comes with years of experience, and I feel like you have to hone in your editing style over years. I would say if you want to keep at it, it's not something you just learn overnight, and it's going to mature and change over time, of course, too.
Yeah, and you really can't learn it from someone else. Like, you really just have to feel it out for yourself. Like there's no there's editing guides, but it's just different with your camera, different with your computer. Like you just have to learn. Practice. That's really all I could say.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, like I know I've borrowed techniques and certain things have become habits even from like other photographers I've met or their processes. But yeah, like you said, it's like you want to find your own way through it all and what you prefer to, take the shots you want to take more of, but also edit them how you want to see them. It's your work, so make it look like you and what you want to do. Do you want to be known as the high saturation photographer, or do you want to be known as something else? I don't know, like
the low contrast,
the panoramic black and white photographer. Yeah. So it kind of it just boils down to what you want, I guess, most out of image taking.
Yeah. So, anything else to add?
No. I mean, there's a lot more, but that covers the base for a while here. Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, I was thinking we kind of went in depth on the core basics of editing. So maybe if you guys like this, let us know. But maybe we could do an episode on kind of like the exposure blending, focus stacking, kind of the
Composites.
more computer assisted kind of editing techniques, maybe.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'd be interested in doing that.
Like bracketing, all that stuff.
Yeah,
There's a lot.
advanced post processing, digital.
Yeah.
That'd be fun. So yeah, maybe we could do that sometime.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So, got any announcements?
No, not really at the moment. I'm not really looking forward to the end of spring just because of the summer slump. Yeah, I'm not looking forward to it, but yeah,
the green leaves everywhere.
And the waterfalls dry up. The birds aren't as sing-songy or colorful, most of them at least. But I'll make do with it. I always do every year. But yeah, I'm looking forward to more camping and traveling. I think I'm going to do more on the road stuff. Nothing too far away, but just more out there stuff, of course. Not too much else though at the moment. But how about you? Yeah,
so I've been posting some like California images on Instagram. So make sure you check those out. Don't ask why I'm laughing, listeners. But check those out on my Instagram. I'm sure they look good. It's definitely not like I'm talking for the past year, but yeah. Also, if you go to huntsphotovideo.com, I've got an ad up there now. So I shot an ad for the Mini Max stool. So if you look that up, you'll see my ad on the product page. So if you'd like to watch that, check that out.
Awesome.
There's also a video on my YouTube channel that I did about it as well. So that's pretty much it for me.
Awesome. That's news to me. I'll have to check this out.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Well, thank you everyone for listening. As always, we appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed. Yeah.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for watching the Owl Outdoors Photography Podcast. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and the video version on YouTube as well. You can subscribe down below, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thank you.